But when I looked into the science behind this, what I found is that people were equally likely to be harmed by their inner voice. That just going inside and searching for answers doesn't always help people. Sometimes it makes our problems much, much worse, because then we get stuck in these negative thought loops, like we suck. What if this happens again? The coach hates me, or any number of forms that lead to things like anxiety and depression. And so that was a puzzle that I wanted to try to solve, right? So why is it that sometimes this inner voice is a tool that can help us, but other times it can really harm us? And how do you make it help you if it's harming you?
Yeah. Hey, Ethan, we're all live now. Ethan just told us that he's a Giants fan. Grew up a Giants fan?
Grew up a Giants fan.
Okay, yeah. Why not Jets? What's the reason why you weren't a Jets fan?
Well, it was always I rooted for the Jets as long as they weren't competitive with the Giants. That's how it worked. It's like Yankees Mets dynamic.
Yeah. So if the Jets found their way, which probably will never happen, found their way into the Super Bowl, are you rooting for the Jets?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay. True New Yorker then. All the way through.
Yeah. Now I'm a Wolverine, I've got to say. That's taken over.
Oh, yeah. Ann Arbor, huh?
Allegiance college football, yeah. But the Cowboys were always an interesting team growing up to think about. So
because we used to kick y'all's ass all the time, Ethan. That's why.
Pretty much.
That is the reason. Much. That is the reason why. It was interesting.
All right, Ethan, I want you to be brutally honest. What did you think of Darren when he was playing?
Well, I respected the talent. I will say that.
That's a great answer.
But there might have been some it's interesting. So I just wrote a book on the inner voice and that stream of thoughts. And I don't know that you would want to peer into my inner voice when I saw you make some of the plays that you did. We might not be talking too friendly right now.
The inner voice. We're definitely going to get to that. And you mentioned your book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. And I opened this before we press record. I'm super excited about this because I want to know if my inner voice is most jacked up inner voice you've ever met in your life.
Yeah, there's so much around this. There's so much meat on this bone, based on the fact of, as an athlete, and both Ben and I were former athletes, and our other co-host actually played in the NFL for 7, 8 years, Tyler.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the same thing. I mean, you always had that, I always had that inner voice in my head going into the game. And we'll get into this, but I really need to know and understand why that inner voice pops up and why it's there. And it's either a negative or it's a positive, and, we can go that way. But hey, let's start back and start with your journey. Ethan, where did you grow up, and what were the family dynamics when you were growing up in Brooklyn, right?
In Brooklyn, yeah. I grew up in a working class neighborhood of Brooklyn, a real melting pot, lots of different people, every color, every religion, every nationality. Looking back, it was a really neat place to grow up, except for when I was, looking behind my shoulder to make sure I wasn't getting mugged. That aside, it was a lot of fun. And, I had an interesting family dynamic because my mom was an elementary school teacher, and, kind of what you would think of, as a warm, supportive, loving mom. Did her job, came home, we hung out. My dad, on the other hand, was a bit of an unconventional character. Never went to college. Well, he did for about a year or so, dropped out. Smoked voraciously, loved flipping off other people on the road in Brooklyn. He embodied this stereotype, big bushy mustache.
Nice.
Except when he wasn't doing that kind of stuff, he was reading about Eastern philosophy, about meditation, about mindfulness. He was meditating. I have this image in my head of him sitting, with his legs crossed, lotus position, in the bed, cigarette sometimes hanging from his mouth as he's as he's meditating.
Meditating.
That was an interesting environment. What was interesting about my dad, the reason I bring him up is he's talked to me like I was really a friend and an adult from the time I was a little kid for as long as I can remember. So, it's not to say he didn't take me to Little League and soccer and help, do all that kind of fun stuff, but he was also talking to me about the mind and how it can get you in trouble and what he had been reading about with respect to how can you manage the mind to give you an edge. And when he talked to me about that stuff growing up, it was pretty oppressive, pretty, I didn't always, I was more happy talking about GI Joes and Transformers and things like that, or the Yankees, not necessarily the Cowboys. But his messages stuck with me throughout my childhood and adolescence. And interestingly, as parents have a way of doing, I heard his voice throughout my life, and I've heard it, and it has influenced me ever since.
So were you an only child, or did you have brothers and sisters?
I was the only child. And, in contrast to all the stereotypes that say only children love being only children and, sent to the world, I would have liked to have some brothers and sisters to hang around with, but I didn't. Yeah. How about the two of you?
I grew up with three, single mom, two brothers and an older sister, and I was the baby. I was the punching bag for a number of years until they all moved out. But yeah, I was that kid. The reason why I was scrappy was because I was always, fighting for the leftovers most of the time.
Yeah, I've got three brothers myself. So there wasn't a lot of time for my inner voice. It was usually one of them yelling at me. Yeah. While we were fighting with each other. So you said something a second ago, and I have two young children. Darren's got 4 kids himself. You said you were typically more interested in GI Joes, but your dad was trying to integrate and ingrain these philosophical thoughts into your head. How would you say you received that at that age? Because I think as parents, we obviously want to pass along things, but we don't always know if they're going to get it or not. So how did you receive that information as a kid?
I was like a freaking sponge. I just absorbed it, and I absorbed it even when I didn't want to be absorbing it. So in other words, even when we were in the car, traveling on the Bell Parkway, me seeing the finger fly up every, like in Brooklyn. I don't know if have you guys spent much time in Brooklyn?
I've been once. I've got my stereotypical imagination of what it's like, but
so when you go to like the DMV, essentially most people learn how to drive like this. In Brooklyn, it's like this.
On that horn.
That's how you go. Right. For listeners, I've got one hand on.
Yes, yeah. Here in Texas, you don't use that horn like you do in Brooklyn.
In Texas, it might be more dangerous because in Brooklyn, it's mostly just talk. Texas might be concerned with what might happen.
Exactly right.
In Michigan, of course, where I live now, it's interesting. No one uses the horn. We don't even need horns. People will actually better hit your car than use the horn because everyone wants to be so polite. The only exception to that is when this team from Ohio comes to play.
Oh yeah,
OH, right?
Yes.
OH.
Them Buckeyes will roll in. Yeah, it's about time you guys got the Buckeyes off your back, man. It's about that time now. It's been a while.
It would be really, really nice.
I don't know if we want to dive into that just yet. We want to treat them well first.
Well, let me go back to your question. So what was interesting, and this affects my parenting now. So I've got two daughters. They both graduated today. One's going to 6th grade and the other 2nd. All right. So what I learned from my dad was I was always listening. And I really valued him treating me like an adult and not really waiting to talk to me about weighty, important issues until I was, in high school or so. I remember he used to always tell me, no matter what you do, make sure you help people in some way. That was a message that was just ingrained. And so some of the time I'm in my lab, we're doing experiments, but I'm always thinking, how can this work? If it's successful, eventually help people in some real consequential way. So with my kids now, what I do is we do plenty of, horsing around, and it's not GI Joes. It's ballet and theater and,
A little
other
bit
things
different.
of that sort, painting my nails. But I do, I make an effort to like go for a walk with the kids, go for a hike, and just talk to them about the world. And, some of the time they don't want to listen either. And they tell me, my youngest is like, ah, it's just so boring, Daddy. It's so boring.
Yeah.
And
Man,
I muscle through it. So
it's a little disappointing to know that she's already too cool for you in second grade. I've got a 4-year-old as my oldest, and I'm not ready for him to be too cool for me just yet.
Yeah, you just wait. It's coming. It's coming. So, in growing up in Brooklyn, was it, was this? Listen, we're in Dallas. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, but you always heard the stories of New York City at that time. It's always been a tough city. Did it feel that way when you were coming up, that this is different, or is it just you were just so accustomed to the neighborhood and how things played out?
I worked my butt off in high school so I could leave Brooklyn and never come back. So it does pain me now that it has become the coolest place in the universe.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Where people go to vacation, but it was very apparent to me that this was not the way life had to be. I mean, I remember my freshman year in high school, there was this like, this gang going around. They were, did you guys remember Jan Sports book bags?
Oh, yeah.
Remember
Yes,
those?
yeah.
I still got a backpack of theirs.
You got one. Okay.
Oh,
So when I was going freshman year I took the city bus, and there was like a group of kids going around with like razors and just slashing your straps to get the Jan Sport. And so that was life. That was a reality. I mean, it was a different culture, at least compared to where I live now. And, I had a few fights, and I didn't particularly care for them. I mean, loved playing sports and things like that, but I definitely wanted something different for my kids. I mean, I tell my wife, who didn't grow up in that kind of environment, my spidey senses, if you get that reference,
yes,
they're always activated, right? So if I'm in a city, I'm always looking around, I'm checking out my spaces, and that was a result of where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily want my kids to have their spidey senses activated all the time as well.
Yeah, I remember going to the first time I was in New York City. I was with a couple of my buddies, and this was had to be 92 or 93, which was my first time being in New York City. And I had a couple of guys that I played with that were from there, one being from the Bronx and the other one from Brooklyn. And we got on the subway, and before we got on the subway, they told me, "Hey, you don't have any like jewelry or anything on, do you?" And I was like, "No, why?" And they was like, "Good." Just kept walking. And I asked them, I said, "What's the deal?" I said, "Because look, man, we don't want any attraction, and we don't want to bring any attention to what you're wearing." Like it was that crazy. But you're right. Your spidey senses go up because you've lived in that type of situation for so long.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a second. And I've mentioned a dozen times before, I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and so lived there the first 5 years of my life. So very similar to what you're describing there. You always have to be, looking over your shoulder. In fact, my parents had a car stolen at gunpoint at one point while we lived there. So I get that your mentality of I don't want my kids to go through that. Obviously the violence, but I got to think there was perspective growing up in such a dynamic environment that you gained that now maybe your kids don't have because of the way that you're raising them. How do you balance the dynamic of I want to give them the perspective, but I want to give them also a better life than maybe I grew up with?
I mean, this is a great question. This could be the next book. Maybe it's the three of us. And
I love it.
Yeah,
Love the idea.
I think about this a lot. We're fortunate because where we live in Ann Arbor is this wonderful oasis in the Midwest, and it's a culturally diverse area like Brooklyn. So the elementary school that my kids go to, they have an international night every year, and there's something like 40 or 50 different countries represented. And so that's really great. And one thing I really valued was, my friends didn't all look and talk the same. There were all sorts of people from all sorts of areas. And that's something that I think was really helpful for giving me a perspective on how different people thought and felt. And so that's something I think they get. What they don't have is a bit of the edge, which, I try to give to them. Sometimes I'll sneak up behind my daughter. What are you going to do? How are you going to get out of this? You got the ears, you got the eyes, you got the, so, so I do try to just alert them to the fact that the way they're living is really, very different from the way most people are living right now. I didn't leave this country until I graduated college. Like I took like 2 flights before that, and they've already been overseas, and so just reminding them of where they're growing up and that it's unique and that it's important to take other perspectives into account. That's something we do a lot of. Whether it has the intended effect, we'll see.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think about constantly is how do I give my boys perspective? Because it seems that we've at least if you look at social media, Twitter, things like that, it seems we've gotten away from the value of all being different, yet we all have a common goal. It's you think differently than me, I hate you. It seems to be, and maybe that's just where my mind is. We can talk about that in a little bit. My inner chatter.
Inner chatter, yeah. So let's bring you back to high school. Let's get back to high school because I know you end up going off to college and all, but I want to get that understanding of, what was your mindset going through high school? What was your high school years like in Brooklyn? Or would you go to high school in Brooklyn? Did you bus out and go somewhere else?
No, I did. So I went to, so here's what happened in high school. To understand what happened in high school, we have to go back to the award ceremony in junior high school.
Okay.
8th grade award ceremony, and my parents are there, my grandparents are there, and I'm watching like all these friends of mine go up there for awards in math and science and so. And most of them getting multiple awards, and I get called up for award for gym class basically.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I feel you. That stings.
If I stood up, you might think that this was a charity award. That's all I'm going to say here. I didn't play sports, but so I'll leave it at that. And I remember, so I stood up to get the award. I remember looking over at my grandparents who were like Holocaust survivors and like everything is about education. And I see them both like this, it's like looking down in disappointment. And so the reason I bring up the story is there was a switch that was flipped. It was a motivational switch. I decided right there, I thought to myself, I know these other people who are getting these awards in math and English and whatever, and they're great, but I know I could do what they're doing. And so I just decided I'm gonna focus. And so I then switched to high school. And, I got straight A's. I did really well. I never got a bad grade after that. And so that was a real switch. And so I was a super, super serious student in high school. I still played sports. I did soccer and baseball and wrestling, a little bit of boxing, actually. That was my dad's last gift. This is maybe worth 60 seconds. Actually, I'm not going to put a time limit on. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago, and the person who was hosting the interview was a Navy SEAL. And I said to him, you know what? There's one important thing I want to tell you. Just give me 90 seconds. And I did it, and I really thought I stuck the landing. So when I was done, I was like, so how'd I do? How long? It was like 97 seconds. Wow. I'm like, that's pretty good, right? Yeah. And then his response, deadpan, is, it depends if there was a bomb set to go off at 90 seconds.
Those Navy SEAls, man, they're hardcore.
Yeah, so I'm not putting a time.
No, don't. Just tell us.
So I got into, I got into a really good college, an Ivy League school, and my dad, really serious, comes to me when like the last semester of high school, after I know where I'm going, is like, all right, Ethan, there's no discussion about this. It's my final gift to you before you go off into the world, the big, scary world, mind you, of like an Ivy League school. And you got to take boxing lessons. You got to know how to defend yourself in those college classes. And so he found this gym it was called Cowboy Louis D's gym. It was set up in this
great name,
rough area of Queens. And I got knocked around for a couple of months. So I did that too. But that was high school. Yeah. And I got to college and I knew how to defend myself.
We're going to get to college. I do want to go back to that 8th grade moment, because to me, motivation is fleeting, right? You have a moment, you're super energized, you're super motivated, but then that motivation fails or it fades, I guess is a better way to put it. So what was that inner drive? I know that was the flip that switched on, but how did you keep that burn for the next 4 years in high school?
Well, I think part of it goes back to where I was growing up in Brooklyn and really not wanting to live that kind of life, and recognizing that there was a whole lot more to the world than what was happening there. And it became a challenge that I was up for meeting that challenge. And that didn't, it was what we would call in my, technical terms, it was an intrinsic drive. This was not someone paying me to do something. This was burning from within. I had my sights set on doing something with my life, and I knew that getting good grades was a means to doing that. Now, I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do.
Right.
Where I grew up, if you did well in school, there were 2 paths available to you. One was becoming what I would call a real doctor, which is what my mom constantly reminds me of. That's an MD, not the PhD, or a lawyer. Like that's it. That's the whole world. When I got to college, I saw there was a lot more out there than that. But yeah, I was able to maintain that motivation, which was crucial.
And what's interesting about that story is that it was a negative reaction that you saw from your grandparents. It wasn't a positive. It was, you reacted off of something that was negative, that influenced you to say, okay, I'm going to buckle down. And that's interesting because you don't see that a lot. You see a lot more of that. There's been somebody positively influencing you and pushing you and guiding you and whatnot. But, I can relate to that because there was a lot of negative things that happened in my life to where now it's basically a chip on my shoulder to say, here it is, I'm going. This is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a chip on the shoulder is a good way of describing it. One of the things that I think helped me, though, in that moment of negativity was the messaging that I did get from my parents growing up, which was, if you put your mind to it, you could do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. So I had that positive message reinforced over and over again. Mm-hmm. And now I came to this realization, like I believe that, but now I had this realization, hey, wait, if I don't start putting more effort into this, I'm not going to actually get to that point. I was doing my homework on the school bus coming home. I came home every day. My mom was like, don't you have any homework? I'm like, I did it already. And I did. But clearly, there was more that could be done. So, so I just hit reset with how I approached school and life, and knock on wood, it's worked out.
And I love the way how you just earlier on breezed over the University of Pennsylvania.
I was going to say,
like Penn,
the hard work paid off.
School, I just went to an Ivy League school, and I was like, wait, I'm Arizona State grad. He's an Abilene Christian grad.
We can't even spell Ivy League. So the hard work paid off. You go to the University of Pennsylvania. Tell us about that time there. What did you learn there while you were in school?
Well, the first thing I learned was that I wasn't tall. So this just as an aside. So I'm 5'7" on a good day. Now, I don't know if it's the water or the gene pool or what, but in Brooklyn, I was like a slightly above average height, you know, and then I get to Penn. I remember there were these fraternities that line the main drag, we called it the Locust Walk. And there's this one fraternity with this beach volleyball court right on, you know, the diag. And there were these guys, shirts off year round, playing beach volleyball. And I'm looking at like, my God, what is going on here? No one told me, you know? So that was the first thing that I humorously encountered. But so when I got to college, I hit another challenge, actually. I remember, you know, I had loaded up. Let me back up. No one in my family had gone to a school like Penn. My dad didn't go to college. I didn't even know what the University of Pennsylvania was until I started researching schools. It just wasn't on the radar.
Right.
And so I didn't have anyone to coach me with respect to, hey, here's how you decide which classes to take. Here's how to schedule them. So I made a huge rookie mistake. I scheduled 5 classes in a row, starting at like 9 a.m. or 8:30, you know, back to back, just get them over with.
Yeah.
And, you know, no one told me I'd be up until 3 a.m. every morning in the dorm. So I remember like this, you know, in calculus, I remember like a friend of mine told me this trick, you know, you hold your fingers to your eyes to keep your eyes open. And I remember, so I ended up graduating. Did not do good that first semester. Ended up with a 2.98 GPA.
Oh, thanks. Right.
I didn't do good that semester. I just had a 3.0. No big deal.
All right. Well, you know, okay. I'm not.
We're just messing with you. We're just messing with you.
Ethan, appreciate you, man. Thanks.
What'd you graduate with?
Thanks for the encouragement.
I had my sights set, you know.
No, we're just messing. We're just messing.
I know. Well, so I remember I got the grades and I was like, whoa, you know, I didn't get anything less than A's before that, you know, in high school. And so now I got a C. Yeah. And so I had to reinvent how I approached school again. I had to figure out how to like relearn how to study in college, how to take courses. And that's when I kind of said, you know what, I'm going to take a step back from this pre-med track, which I didn't even really like. And I took all different sorts of classes. I took a class in folklore. I took a class in international relations, and a class that my dad was like, you've got to just try it, in psychology. And that's when I really fell in love with a topic.
Yeah.
And that happened in the second semester of my freshman year. And then I just dove all in to psychology after that.
Yeah. You know, we joke, but you got punched in the mouth in that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, not physically, obviously, because, you know, you had the boxing background, but you actually got punched in the mouth. And in that moment,
else.
In that moment, you could have easily folded. You could have said, this isn't for me. There's 100 ways you could have reacted. But you said, you know what, I'm going to reset. I'm going to reinvent myself. So what was it about psychology that just captured your attention? What was the love there?
Well, I had this kind of, this like going back in time because, you know, the first part of psychology, I'm learning about mice and rats and how they learn things. And then about halfway through the semester, we get to the topic of introspecting, of what happens when bad things happen, and you kind of go inside yourself to figure out what's going on. How can you come up with a solution? And when we came to that topic, I was reminded of all the conversations I used to have with my dad, who used to tell me, hey, whenever, you know, you get punched in the mouth, search inside yourself for the answer. Turn your attention inward, tap into that inner voice, you know the answer, and come up with a solution, and then move on. And here I came across people who were doing science on this issue. And the results were actually surprising because some people, I remember my professor telling me, really benefited from being able to search inside themselves for answers. Something's wrong. Well, what should I do? You know, inner voice stuff, like how should I engage here? and they'd come up with a solution and move on. But other people really ended up suffering from doing that thing. So the moment something bad happened and they started to think about it, they'd start worrying and for lack of a better term, just spinning over stuff, right? Getting stuck. And why that happened was a huge question for me. Like, why do we have this mind that can give us the edge in so many cases? And it certainly helped me in a lot of cases, but for other people, this amazing organ between our ears was getting them into trouble in really profound ways, from the ball field and professional sports to relationships to people's physical health. And so that lit another spark, and it really motivated me to give up my dreams of playing for the Yankees and pursuing a PhD instead.
Right. So did you continue through? Okay, so that was your freshman year when this happened, right? So you, for the next 3-4 years now?
Three and a half years.
3.5 years. So you go through this process of that. Now you've made the decision. Did you end up graduating with that degree, or what was the degree you graduated?
Yeah, I graduated with that degree. I worked in labs. I was a total pain in the butt to my buddies because actually the way I figured out I wanted to spend my life doing this was I'd find myself, studying in the library for just midterms or finals or in a bookstore. And on breaks, I kind of just go over to the psychology section of the bookstore and flip through the books. And then like on Friday or Saturday nights, I mean, you guys are going to love this. I'd be walking to the parties or the bars with my buddies. And, you can imagine what they're talking about. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this idea from, I heard about in class? And they're looking at me like,
dude,
beat
it, nerd.
Saturday night. And so, I thought to myself, if I'm spending my spare time thinking about these ideas, then why don't I spend my life getting, compensated to do this, right? That seems like a good kind of job to have. In other words, I had discovered my passion. And so
at an early age.
So I was lucky there. And then I went straight into graduate school, got my PhD, got kicked, punched in the face a few more times during that. And then ended up in Michigan.
Let's talk about that. You went from one school that we could never even get close to touching to another, the University of Columbia, Columbia University.
Yes.
Sorry, Columbia University. Let me get that right. I can't even say it right, apparently.
They had a formidable football program.
Yeah.
What are they, baby blue and white? Is that Columbia, baby blue and white? Is that right?
Yeah, the funny thing about that stuff is, so, at Penn, the top dogs on campus were like the fencers, the fencers and the wrestlers. I remember going to see we were the Quakers, very formidable mascot. I remember we won the Ivy League championships. I think there were 100 of us in the stands at So then Columbia was even worse when it came to sports. So being in Michigan is this whole new experience.
So walk us through that. You said you got punched in the mouth a few more times.
Well, I got to Columbia, and I ended up working my mentor. So the way PhD programs work is it's really this medieval process. It's like you're paired up with a master, and like the Jedi master, you don't know much, and then you just learn from them, and they kind of mold you into some kind of image of themselves. And so I worked with this really famous guy named Walter Mischel. You might know him if you've ever heard of the marshmallow test. So you give a kid a choice. You say you can have one marshmallow now, or here are two marshmallows. If you wait. I'm back. Have you guys heard about this test?
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So he was the guy who developed that test. So he was like royalty in psychology, and he was tough. He was tough to start. I remember the first time I met him, I went over to his apartment. It was on Riverside Drive in New York City, super fancy. He was from Brooklyn also. So I thought, Yankees, breaks the ice with everyone. So, you're a sports fan, you like the Yankees, and he's I don't watch sports. You know? And
This is going to go well.
You know, he was going to museums, and so it was an interesting experience. But he was tough. I would write papers, and he'd tell me that this, you know, this isn't good. He might have used some other words. I mean, think of like a really tough coach,
Bill Parcells,
who probably loved his players and wanted them to succeed, but he wasn't going to settle for anything less than perfect.
Yes.
And in fact, when you start, at least when I started with Walter, first 2 years were like Navy SEALs training. I mean, I would send him stuff at 3 a.m. He'd call me up at 6. Wow. And I mean, it was like sleep deprivation, Navy SEAL. And like, once you get past those first 2 years, then it was, you know, we were buddies, had a father-son kind of relationship, but it was really intense. Yeah. So,
you know, an interesting concept that I always think about is when you chase a passion or a dream, you're willing to go through the crap. You're willing to go through those 3 a.m., 6 a.m. sleep deprivation. Did you find in those moments like this isn't worth it, or were you just so invested in that idea that it didn't matter what you had to do to get there?
Well, you know, I think about this a lot because I'm in the mentor position now for a lot of students, and I don't do this, just for the record. You know, no calls either direction in the evening, in the early morning hours. I think what allowed me to get through it was having the mindset that I'm here to learn, and this is someone who can really teach me. Yeah. And I knew he was, you know, it was never abusive. It was tough, and there's a difference between tough and abusive. So it never came close to the latter. But I just recognized that I don't know. I don't know a lot, and I'm here to learn. And I think having that kind of humility was really helpful. And I'm always impressed when I see that in others, just recognizing that we don't always have the answers. Yes. And I didn't have most of them back then. So I was happy to be taught, and you know, so that made it easier.
Absolutely.
So let's move forward from there. Okay, so you're in school. You're about to graduate. What was your plan? Was there a game plan in place to where, okay, here's the next step. This is what I want to do in my life?
You know, I'd say at every major transition, there was a big leap of faith. Mm-hmm. I remember when I applied to graduate school, I thought I wanted this PhD, you know, but I didn't really know. And I just kind of went with it. And it took a while, about a year, for it to set in and say, all right, this is for me. And then at the next level, when it came time to get a faculty position, you know, I was just, in retrospect, I feel like I was really naive. I applied to 4 places. I got interviews at 2. Mm-hmm. And then I got one of those jobs, and it turned out to be a dream job here at the University of Michigan. And, you know, I came here, asked myself repeatedly for the first several months, you know, all inside my head, by the way, when are they going to figure out they made a mistake? You know, I mean, like I get here, and there are these super famous people in my field. Like, you know, I'm reading about them in textbooks and watching them on TV a few months ago, and now they're knocking on my door, asking me to go out for lunch or asking me for my opinion on stuff. And well, what is going on here? So there's a lot of inner monologue happening. Absolutely. A lot of chatter at that point. But Michigan ended up being an absolute dream. This is a place that I describe it like people have big hearts, big brains, and really small egos. And that is a killer combination for me.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you don't see that in a lot of places. So people work together, they collaborate. It's not like I'm going to do my thing because this is me and my world. It's let's work on these important problems, questions. And it's been incredibly fun and rewarding to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a hard thing to get everybody to submit their ego and work together. You know, I may know a lot, but I'm going to be humble and come together with the team and come together with everybody. That's a great lesson there. So you mentioned earlier your children and you're married. At what point did you meet your wife in this whole process?
So I met I have psychology to thank for that. So I met her, and I almost screwed it up because psychology connected us and I'll tell you how that happened. So I was my junior year, I was taking a psychology class at night. And I remember I lived about 15 minutes, a 15-minute walk away from where the class was. I remember there was this cute girl who, like, the moment I turned off my block, she was like 15 feet in front of me. And it was a little creepy because, like, every place she turned, I just happened to have to turn also.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right.
Oh, right. Even, okay.
It was a little strange.
Yeah,
right?
a little creepy.
So, this is happening for 15 minutes, and I'm conscious of this. So I start, like, now hanging back a little bit more because I don't want to be, misperceived as a creep. But it turns out she ends up in the class that I'm taking. Huh. And so, it wasn't so creepy. We were actually going to the same place. And, I registered her, and then second class, when we were done, I approached her, hey, introduced myself, did my thing, which is not very elegant, mind you, but it worked. And it turned out she was my next door neighbor, and we hit it off. And it's funny because I remember that she used to she didn't like the class very much. She's like, well, come on, let's not go to this. Let's not go this week. Let's go do whatever. And I was like, I gotta go. It's grad school. Come on. You're killing me here. And so I did go, but we ended up connecting, and we both moved to New York City for graduate school together, and have been together ever since.
So she's a psychologist as well.
She's a nutritionist. So she was a psych major, but then she went into nutrition, which ends up having a ton of psychology.
Absolutely.
Boy.
100%.
Your kids are in trouble, bro. They are.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that leads you up to what you're doing today, and we do want to dive into that. We mentioned the book a second ago, which we both just ordered, and we're about to dive into ourselves. Chatter, the voice in our head, why it matters, and how to harness it. So what is the voice in our head? Where does it come from? Let's lay some ground rules there about the voice in our head. I want to take a quick break from the episode. We're sitting here talking about chatter with Ethan Kross. So allow me to be the inner voice in your head and let you know about our sponsor for today's episode, Choctaw Casino and Resort in Durant, Oklahoma. We talk about them every single week. Just how awesome of an escape. Just right up the road, honestly. Not very far from here in DFW, but how awesome of an escape it is. Take your wife, take your family, get up there. They've got concerts all summer long. They've got a brand new pool expansion there. Just tons of great fun activities up there at Choctaw Casino and Resort. Take yourself up there, take your family up there, and enjoy and have a good time. Now back to the episode.
The voice in our head it's our ability to use language silently, right? So if I asked you to just say, I'm going to give you a sentence to say, and I want you to repeat it in your head, okay? The Giants are the greatest team of all time.
I knew you were going to do that. I can't do it. I can't digest that one.
I'm screaming it in my head right now.
I keep throwing it back out at you. I can't digest that.
Can you imagine the response when I go give a talk at Ohio State?
Oh,
go blue.
They boo you out of that place for sure.
Not good. So, we can all do, if you've got like a mind, if you could talk out loud, you could talk to yourself basically. And we do that. And the thing that I think is not on everyone's radar is like, this is a real superpower that lets us do many different things. Like, it lets us do things like remind ourselves of what's on our to-do list or grocery list. You go to the grocery store. What do I got to get? Cheese sticks, eggs, milk. That's your inner voice. But then our inner voice lets us do other things too, like plan and simulate for the future. So before I have a big presentation, I'll go over what I'm going to say in my head.
Right.
Or people often report before a date, they'll often rehearse what they're going to say to the person. Our inner voice lets us coach ourselves. And we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. Come on, man, you could do it, can be really, really useful in particular in the context of sports and performance, right? This ability to actually motivate ourselves, like we're talking to ourselves, like we're our own coach. And then the other thing our inner voice lets us do is it lets us tell stories about our life that give shape to who we are. Like things happen, you lose the big game, you choke. I'm not pointing at either of you, by the way. I'm talking about people in general.
Right.
But life is filled with adversity. And when that happens, we've got to make sense of it. And the inner voice helps us do it, right? We figure out these, I missed the shot, and there's no explanation, but I know I'm going to practice hard and do better next time. Like that's one story someone could tell themselves. Another story is you missed a shot. You bleeping suck.
Yes.
You're a total. You're useless. And you could see that's another narrative. And those stories we tell ourselves are powerful. They could put us on totally different trajectories. And so that's a good segue into the dark side of the inner voice, which is what really the book is about. I think of chatter as when this inner voice that we have really, it gangs up and against us. We try to use our voice to solve problems, but we end up worrying and stressing over things repeatedly in ways that make life miserable, in ways that make it really hard for us to do our jobs, to perform at a high level, and in ways that impact our health. And the good news is that there are tons of things, science-based tools people can use to harness that inner voice and make it work for them rather than against. And that's what I study. That's what the book's about.
Okay, I want to go down that road, especially specifically on the narratives, because there's so many different paths we can go down there as far as the inner voice. But what led you to want to focus on the inner voice? I mean, was it something you learned in school, or did you just run into this?
Well, it goes back to my dad, right? So my dad was telling me all along that the inner voice, he didn't call it the inner voice, he called it, my dad was so corny and dramatic. And he would say, the kernel of truth, find the kernel, Ethan, like something's, I got rejected. I asked her out. She said, no, what's the kernel, Ethan? Go inside, find the kernel. I'm like, don't say that in front of anyone else.
Keep it down.
You're killing me here. But so he was always coaching me to find that, to tap into that inner voice, come up with that solution, create that positive narrative. And it served me really, really well. I mean, we've talked about some of the curveballs that life has thrown at me that I was able to manage. There are loads of other ones that I felt that I experienced too, like we all do. Like crap happens, you got to deal with it. But when I looked into the science behind this, what I found is that people were equally likely to be harmed by their inner voice. That just going inside and searching for answers doesn't always help people. Sometimes it makes our problems much, much worse, because then we get stuck in these negative thought loops, like we suck. What if this happens again? The coach hates me, or any number of forms that lead to things like anxiety and depression. And so that was a puzzle that I wanted to try to solve, right? So why is it that sometimes this inner voice is a tool that can help us, but other times it can really harm us? And how do you make it help you if it's harming you?
Yeah.
That was going to be my question. Is the inner voice on default negative? Meaning, is it a survival instinct to think negatively first, and then we've got to work to think positively, or is it genetic where some people just think more? Like, how does that dynamic work?
Well, there's differences, and the differences between people are influenced in part by our genes, in part by our early childhood experiences, where we grew up. Interestingly, we've even learned that I think we're all around the same vintage, age-wise here. Like when we were in school, we learned that there was genes, and then there was your family and environment, and each influenced who you are. What we've learned more recently is actually your genes and your environment, they mix. So you could think about your genes as kind of like having a piano inside the cells of your body. And your genes are the keys of the piano. But what we've learned is that your experiences in the world can influence what keys on that piano get pressed, what genes get actually expressed and influence your behavior. So your genes and experiences, they mix together in really interesting and powerful ways. So that determines in part what we say to ourselves. But the other important thing to know is there's this great finding, which is bad is stronger than good. And what it means is we're more sensitive to the bad stuff in life than the good stuff. And it makes sense if you think about it, because the bad stuff can kill us, right?
Exactly.
So if you think about it, we want to be more focused on a potential loss than on a potential gain. And so it is true that the inner voice tends to be more active by bad stuff. But whether it takes the bad and converts it into a good or just makes the bad worse, that's what we have control over.
Got it. Yeah, you talk about we're told often to shut off that voice or silence that voice, but what you're trying to do is you're saying, no, let's re-educate, let's reset, let's remotivate.
Totally. I shouldn't use this expression. I was going to say I wouldn't wish a silenced inner voice on my worst enemy. Maybe the worst enemy I might, but
maybe Cowboys fans, but other than that.
I tell a story in the book of this woman who really struggled with her inner voice, worries, ruminations, and then she had a stroke, and the stroke wiped out her ability to temporarily use language to talk to other people, which is a common consequence of having a stroke. It didn't just wipe out her ability to talk to other people. It wiped out her ability to talk to herself.
Wow.
And initially she talked about this as being this kind of exhilarating experience, because along with her words leaving her, so did her ability to worry about stuff and ruminate. But then after a little while, she also began to realize that without her words, she didn't really have a sense of who she was. She lost her ability to make sense of her experiences in the world. And that was really, really uncomfortable. And I think that highlights the fact that, like, this inner voice we have, it is a tool. It's a tool of your mind. We don't want to get rid of that tool. We don't want to throw it out the window. We want to figure out how to harness it, how to make it work for us rather than against us.
Yeah.
And that's not a message you hear promoted often in popular culture, right? It's often, I just want to be positive and silence this damn inner voice. This inner voice in my head, I love it. I mean, that sounds wacky, but I mean, I'll often go for a walk and I'll just let my mind go. I'll fantasize about the positive stuff, the vacations, the conquest, like good things that can happen. I'll think about past experiences, and that gives my life real meaning and value.
So are you saying that negative, that negative voice is going to be there every once in a while, right? I mean, let me give you an example of how that voice in my sports career has always affected me. It's leading up to the big game, the Super Bowl, and you're leading up to the game. There's that negative, voice that's in there every once in a while where you start to doubt some of the things that your capabilities, right? I got to cover, so-and-so in the slot. I don't have any help. I can't get beat in front of, 15 million people. This voice is like a ramp up. And I'm speaking specifically to me. I've had these thoughts, even when I've gotten into the locker room before the game, I'm still having these thoughts. And it's something about walking down the tunnel where it just flips, totally flips. And it becomes basically this narcissistic voice to where I'm the baddest son of a bitch ever. Like, I'm going to shut down the guy. I have extreme confidence. I'm not going to back down. And I'm walking down this tunnel like I can't, I'm floating. I'm not even walking anymore. I'm that positive and confident in who I am.
And that dynamic that you just described is in part what makes you the incredible player that you are. And so let me translate that for you into psychological terms and into terms that anyone can benefit from, really. And I talk about this in the book. So when you put a person in a situation involving social threat, which is exactly what you're describing, like 15 million people looking at you, right, evaluating you, all of your brothers on that team looking at you, your coach, your family, like this is like, we are a social species, human beings, right? We care about other people and what they think of us. You are in arguably one of the most stressful situations you can imagine. We basically ask ourselves two questions, and we often do this subconsciously. The first thing we do is we look at the situation and we say, what's required of me? And then we ask ourselves, do I have the resources to manage this situation, to deal with what's required of me? If you ask yourself those two questions and you say, can't do it, that elicits what we call a threat response. And a threat response basically syncs behavior. So it leads to your heart starts pumping blood really fast, but all of the arteries and veins that carry the blood in your body, they clench up. So you got a lot of blood flowing out of your heart, but into a smaller space. That's not really good. You get jammed up biologically. And then you start worrying about stuff and ruminating. Oh my God, I can't do it, which ends up often bringing those fears into reality, creates what we call self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's the bad thing. Now, the transition you made though, is you answered those questions and said, you know what, I can do it, and I'm going to kick ass. I'm going to destroy this other team. That's what we call a challenge response. And a challenge response has the exact opposite set of outcomes associated with it. Your heart starts beating really fast, but then your arteries and veins, they expand. So you've got all this blood that you need to get to your extremities, right? Your body needs the fuel, but your arteries are relaxing, allow it to flow freely. And then in your head, you're constantly reminding yourself, I can do this, I can do it, which in turn improves performance. And so that psychological shift that you engaged in is critical to performing well in high performance situations. I talk about, there's a tool that people often use and that we've studied in the lab that can actually help people go from one state threat to another. It's something we call distant self-talk. And bear with me for a second because it's going to sound a little odd, but there's science behind it. It's a simple language shift. And so what it involves doing is trying to coach yourself through the situation you had, like you were giving advice to someone else. Like, what would you tell your buddy on the team?
Right.
Or what would your coach tell you? Right. What's remarkable, what we've learned is like, we are great advisors to other people, right? But we're not always great advisors to ourselves. You know, we do studies, we ask people to tell us what's streaming through their head during like when the lights are on and the stakes are high. The stuff they tell us, they report saying to themselves, they would never say to another human being. Some of them don't even feel comfortable putting it down on paper because it's so embarrassing, right? The dark thoughts we often have. And this is healthy people. We're not talking about people who have, real full-blown psychiatric problems, just run of the mill. But we would never say those things to our teammates. Our coaches don't say those things to us. And so how do you be your own coach? You use your own name. And the second person pronoun you say, all right, Ethan, man up. Here's what you're going to do in this situation.
Wow.
Right? This is a tool that we find puts people into this coaching mode in ways that can be really helpful.
It's funny you say that And I don't
awesome.
want to speak for Darren, but we were just talking about this because we were doing our research and we saw, one of the studies that you did about the two groups. One was using the language you're talking about. The other one was using first person language. And the one using the language you're talking about actually performed better in the interview. And so Darren and I were sitting here talking about this, and I think, man, I do that all the time. I say I suck or I can do this, and I'm always talking about first person. And Darren said, I say
third
Darren
person
all the time.
I say my name.
And I'm like, where did you learn that? Nobody's ever told me that.
No, but it's, and we ended up doing the quiz before we came on. We went to the website and did the quiz.
How'd you guys do?
I got 7 out of 8.
Yeah, I got 6 out of 8.
Which I want to talk about the one I missed.
But yeah, we got a question about that. But like, it's almost narcissistic in a way. And I've always told myself, don't be that narcissist in public. But when I'm faced with it, it's Darren, it's Woody, it's any name that I could come up with, and I'm talking, and I'm using that third person voice, and it's direct at me in that situation. So you go ahead.
Let me alleviate any concerns you have about the narcissism stuff. So, in all of our studies, this is people doing this privately and usually silently in their head. And what we've learned is that this is an emotion regulation tool. So this helps people control their emotions and perform better under stressful situations. We don't find links between a person's tendency to do this and narcissism. In fact, one of my favorite examples to an anecdote, which really, for me, powerfully highlights how this isn't narcissism, has to do with a girl named Malala Yousafzai, who she's the youngest person to ever win the Nobel Peace Prize. And her story is really an amazing one. She grew up in Pakistan, and from the time she was a little girl, she believed that girls should be able to get an education just like boys can. And the Taliban found out about this, and they plotted to assassinate her. Right. And one day, while she was taking the bus home from school, an assassin boarded the bus and shot her in the face. And she ended up making a full recovery and winning the Nobel Prize for all of her advocacy work. And around the time she won the prize, she went on the Jon Stewart show, The Daily Show, to talk about her experience. And he asked her, "What went through your head when you discovered that the Taliban were coming to get you?" And she said, and I'm going to butcher the quote a little bit, but this is almost verbatim. She said, "I used to think, what would I do if the Tale come to get me? And then I would say to myself, Malala, just take a shoe and hit him. And then I would think to myself, but if you hit the Tale, you're no different from the Tale." So in other words, here you've got a person contemplating arguably one of the few conditions that is more stressful than playing in the Super Bowl. Like an assassin coming to kill her. And what does she do in her head when she's simulating how she's going to respond? She starts coaching herself, like she's talking to someone else, giving herself advice. So, I challenge people to call her a narcissist.
Right.
Nobel Peace Prize. So the thing is, I think there's a difference between talking to yourself out loud in front of the world in an interview and doing it privately. And I think that's why it's sometimes linked with narcissism, but all of our data show it's a really easy to use tool that can benefit people.
God, that's fascinating. It's fascinating that in one context it's totally healthy. In another context, it's like that guy's an asshole.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
That's
but
so
it speaks to, and I want to stay along that line, specifically in sports, and even like if I'm doing a speaking engagement, it's sort of the same mentality of there's some doubt sometimes leading up to the speaking engagement, and then when that switch hits, it is in third person. So in talking that through the years, even when I was in college, I would hear coaches tell us, "Hey, play the game in your head." Continuously play the game in your head. Visualize yourself doing such. And when I would do that, there was an extreme confidence because I would do that, inside my own head, be coaching myself up on certain techniques or whatnot. And there was it was instant positive feedback that was like a confidence builder for me over and over again.
So what's remarkable about this particular tool is how quickly we find it works. It's like a switch goes off. Like a lot of tools for managing your inner voice and your emotion, they take time and effort to implement. But when people switch from I to using their own name, I like to call it like a psychological jujitsu move. It just flips your perspective. And the reason we think that happens is, if you think about like, when do we use names? Like almost all the time that we use names, we use them when we think about other people.
Right.
And so that link between a name and someone else in your brain, it's so strong. The idea is when you use your own name, it's turning on the brain machinery for thinking about others, for putting us into this coach mode. Mm-hmm. And that's why it works so quick. So this is my go-to. Like, I've given hundreds and hundreds of presentations, and, sometimes the stakes are really high, and I still get butterflies. And, sometimes like an organizer can pull an audible on me in the last moment, I'm like, oh, God, this is not, how am I going to manage this? I'm like, all right, Ethan, I channel my high school wrestling coach. I call myself sometimes by my wrestling team nickname, just like you, different names come in there. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you what the nickname was. It was a terrible, terrible nickname.
No, you got to tell it. You got to say it. You got to say it.
Exclusive content here.
You're going to laugh.
Go ahead. I won't laugh. Trust me.
I'm going to challenge you not to laugh.
Okay, we won't laugh.
All right, no laughing here.
Mousetrap.
I had to laugh. I'm sorry. Mousetrap.
I was doing good. I wasn't going to laugh until you laughed.
Until you said mousetrap, I wasn't going to laugh.
I'll tell you the mousetrap, just for listeners who are curious and aren't, into wrestling. We went against my freshman year. We went against this other team, and they were known for this one move that if they get you in this move, lights out, you're done, you're pinned.
Right.
And there's one counter, and it's called the mousetrap. It's like you're trapping the mouse,
Right.
And I was the only person on the team to implement the move, and I won. And so from then on,
like,
my buddies are like the Beast and Hercules, and I'm Mousetrap.
That's how we'll refer you the rest of the episode. Hey, Mousetrap, what do we do about? You talked about the quiz. One of the questions that I missed. The only.
Wait a minute. First of all, can we ask
here? The only question I missed.
Can we ask this, because other people are going to be doing the quiz? So can we ask this question?
Oh, that's true. Should we spoil alert or no?
Okay. Yeah, no, it's all good. We'll give the listeners exclusive content.
There we go.
How about we do this? Pause the episode right now. Go take the quiz and then come back.
Yeah,
how about that?
There you go.
All right, the one about venting emotions reduces harmful mental chatter. I said this was true. Obviously, I was incorrect there. So I assumed, hey, yeah, get it out of your head, verbalize it. Now, obviously, I understand that why long term it's not a good thing, but why is that not helpful to vent your emotions?
Well, I'm glad you brought this one up, and I would not feel bad about getting it wrong, because this is one of the most frequently misunderstood phenomenon. So there's a huge myth out there about venting, and our culture perpetuates it, because we often hear, if something's bothering you, find someone to just get it out and unload. Yep. And there's been a ton of research on this. And what we've learned is venting your emotions, this is really good for creating tight friendship bonds between two people. Like it feels good to know that there's someone out there that cares enough about me that they're willing to listen and hear what happened to me. And so that can feel really good in the moment. But if all you do is vent, what ends up happening is you leave the conversation and all these negative thoughts are super active in your head. Right. So you've just talked about what's driving you nuts about, the Cowboys or the Giants. You couldn't believe they did that. That son of a bleep, bleep, bleep. Man, what would you do if they did that to you? That bleep, 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 bleep. And so then people are animated and upset when they're done. And so in terms of the chatter, venting is bringing people closer together, but it's not doing anything to rid you of those negative thought loops that can be really destructive. So the best kinds of conversations between two people when it comes to chatter, they do two things. You do want to let the person get their emotions out to a certain degree. It is important to express your feelings and let the person you're talking to learn about what happened to you. But ideally, at a certain point in the conversation, the person you're talking to you starts pushing you to reframe your experience, to think differently about, all right, so that, you know, they did a low blow move on the field, but look, that's a part of football. So how are you going to manage that next time without losing your cool? Or, you know, you got dumped by someone in a relationship. Oh man, that was harsh the way they let you down. But you look, more people out there, there are more things you could do, or here's how I've dealt with it. And so the idea is that the person you're talking to, because usually the bad thing hasn't happened to them that you're talking to them about, they're in an ideal position to give you some sense of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is often really relieving, right? Because when we're stuck experiencing chatter, the thing that we're worried about or angry about or sad about, it's the entire world. It consumes us.
Right.
But if they can cue us to just step back a little bit and see that bigger picture, we often realize, hey, there's a lot more going on than just this, and that can make us feel better.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up here in a minute on ways that we can harness and educate ourselves beyond just speaking to yourself in third person. But really quickly, you mentioned you have a soon-to-be sixth grader, a soon-to-be second grader, daughters.
Yes.
How are you handling social media with them? How can parents educate? How can we prepare? Where does social media play with all this?
Social media is a tough one, especially from the parenting point of view. We've been doing, in my lab, we actually do research on social media and its effects on well-being. And, you know, the results aren't always very nice. And so I think it's really easy when kids in particular go on social media and they start seeing these like amazing accomplishments of others and comparing their own lives against them. It can make them feel bad. So, one thing that we do is I teach my kids about social media. So they're not on social media. It's not necessary right now for either of them to be on, in the sense that some of their friends are on, but others aren't. They're not missing out on opportunities because they're off it. And so we're going to keep them off for as long as we can. I'm beginning to see with the sixth grader, though, you know, some real interest. And what I do is I try to teach her about it. I teach, like, here's what's fascinating about social media. So when I started doing research on this over 10 years ago, we didn't have a playbook to understand what social media is and how navigating it in different ways can influence how we feel. Over the past 10 years, we've learned a lot. What we've learned is social media is a new environment that we spend a lot of time in. And just like the offline world, we can navigate social media in ways that are helpful or harmful to us. And so it's like the offline world. Growing up in Brooklyn, I learned from a young age, and my parents helped teach me this, that if I went to the wrong neighborhoods and spoke to the wrong people the wrong way, big trouble. But if I, went to other neighborhoods and spoke to other people other ways, I'd, benefit, and everything in between, right? So there were lessons about how to navigate this physical world in a way that helps me. I think the same is true of social media. There are ways of, like, social media can do some good for us. It can connect us with other people. It can give us support. It can help us keep abreast of what's going on in the world. But, it can lead us astray too if you get caught up in cyberbullying and comparing yourself to others. And so I talk to my kids about this. Usually these are the walks where my second grader tells me I'm being bowling, but but I try to educate them about this in the same way that I do how to conduct themselves in the physical world, in the offline world, in ways that I hope will help them.
Yeah. Listen, there's so many ways. And I'm listening to you talking, and I'm starting to think about, where we are as a country right now, as a world. The anxiety is just quadrupled, specifically through COVID. Addiction. I mean, there's so many ways that in what we're talking about right now, and how to eliminate the chatter, and maybe turn that chatter into confidence, and in ways eliminate some of the anxiety. Can you give us some help in that as we move forward there?
Yeah, totally. So let me give people a framework that I find really helpful to think about this. There are things you could do on your own, lots of tools to manage your chatter on your own. And like talking to yourself in the third person, that's one way to do it. Coach yourself, give yourself advice like you were giving advice to your best friend. Another thing you could do on your own, if you're dealing with an acute stressor, like playing in the Super Bowl, a big acute stressor. Think about how you're going to feel, a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, after it's over. Usually our emotions fade, our negative experiences with time, and reminding yourself, like with COVID sucks, right? It stank for me. And, well, how am I going to feel about this in 6 months when we're vaccinated and, life is back to normal? That gave me hope that things would get better, made me feel better. So there are lots of things you could do on your own. And I talk about a lot of other ones in the book. Then another set of tools comes from our relationships with other people. And we talked about, like with the venting discussion, other people in our life can be either assets or liabilities. So if you just talk to people who just stir you up, that's not going to help you with your chatter. Right. But if you've got the right, I think of this as like having an advisory board. Like, who are my chatter buddies? Who are the 3 people I could turn to? They're going to listen to me and then give me advice to help me through this, advice that I value. Having that chatter board, I think, can be really powerful. And as can thinking really carefully about who you go to help, who you seek out help from, right? Because it's like, there's some people who love me a lot and I love them. And I know they love me because like our DNA links us, right? But I don't go to them with my chatter because I know it just makes it worse. So who are the people who really help you? Go to those people. And then there are other ways you could harness your relationships that I get into as well. I mean, some things are simple, like affectionate touch between, like partners. I mean, touch is powerful, right? You don't want to go around touching your coworkers and colleagues, but your partners, your kids, your close friends. When a baby comes into this world and they are writhing in pain, what do we do to soothe them? We hold them, we touch them. And an affectionate embrace that releases stress-fighting chemicals that can be really useful. So that's another thing. The last bucket, though, are things you could do in the world, your environments. And I think these are really fascinating tools. And so if I just take a couple minutes to tell you about some of these, I think they'll hit home.
Yeah.
You guys watch tennis?
Yes.
Our producer, you can't see on screen, is a tennis player, so she absolutely watches it. But yeah, definitely. Okay, so here's a quiz. I'm a professor, as I do it for a living, so you'll have to forgive me, right? Producer might want to get in. Just like yell us the answer if you know it.
Give the answer. You guys, Rafael Nadal.
Yep.
Beyond being known for being one of the greatest tennis players of all time, what else is Nadal known for doing on the tennis court?
On the court,
like trick shots between legs. No, I know he's a killer at the French
Open.
Open.
That's a good guess. What about your producer?
Is a nervous tick.
Oh yeah, he's always pulling on his shorts and his his ears and his
So not only is he digging up his butt for wedgies and
but he does it every time. Yeah.
He does it every time, and he does it the exact same way every time. So every time he comes on the tennis court, it starts when he comes on the tennis court. He always carries rackets in one hand and his gear in another. And he walks to his bench. He puts them down in a certain sequence. Then he turns to the crowd, starts bouncing on his 2 feet as he undoes his jacket. Then he positions his water bottle and power drink in a certain way on a diagonal to the court. Takes a sip of one, then another, and then puts them back carefully. And then between serves, he's doing this. he's picking the wedgie. I remember watching it with my grandmother. She's like, oh, it's so disgusting. But he's asked, and he's been asked about this. And so he says, first thing he's asked is like, what's the hardest thing you struggle to do on the tennis court? And the two of you as athletes can, resonate. Like, what's the hardest thing you struggle with on the field? His answer is not returning his opponent's backhand or making sure his serve stays in bound. He says, the hardest thing I struggle to do is manage that voice inside my head. Mm-hmm. And he turns to these rituals to help him do that. What a ritual is it's a rigid sequence of behaviors that you do the exact same way every time. And it's a sequence of behaviors that have meaning, right? Mm-hmm. So it could be totally odd things, but you do it like, when you're in the huddle, you say the same thing every time before you break, right. Or, before the free throw, you bounce 3 times, you shake your shoulder. I didn't play basketball, obviously, right. But you get the deal. Here's how this works. There's been research on this, and what we've learned is rituals aren't just these little quirks. Rituals provide people with a sense of control and order. When our inner voice, when our chatter is stirring, when it's brewing, it often feels like we don't have control, right? Our thoughts are in control. You suck. What are you going to do? Oh my God. And by creating order in the world, that compensates for that feeling like we're not in control, gives us a sense of control, a sense of order, a sense that we can really manage the situation, which research shows can actually lead to improvements in performance and make people feel better. So that's one thing you could do when you're under stress, is do a mini ritual right before you. I say the same thing to myself before I go on stage, right? Silently. I say exactly the same thing every time. And, take a deep breath, and then I go. Like, it's a little mini ritual. This is also one of the reasons why a lot of people organize and clean up when they're stressed out. I'm not a particularly organized guy. I'm organized up here, but my wife is constantly bemoaning the fact that there's a trail of clothes that follows me from the shower, down the stairs. Like, what is going on here? But when I'm stressed out, I go around the house like with a toothbrush, and I put everything in order. And there's a science. Lots of people do this when they're stressed, and there's a science behind it. You're ordering your surroundings to create order up here. And that's an easy, actionable tool that people can use.
Is that a sense of control too?
Totally.
Okay. So it's a sense of order and a sense of control. Hey, I can control it.
So I'm not sick. I'm okay.
Oh, you're sick.
No,
for other reasons,
I'm not sick. I'm not sick. So I can do that's me all day long. Like, I'm doing everything around the house when I'm anxious about it. Like, I can't get any work done on it, but I can do the laundry, I can do the dishes, I can clean up the I'm a little
So here's the interesting thing about this. This is more myth busting. So some people think you use the word rituals, they think instantly OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD, obsessive compulsive. This is an example of taking what science says is a useful tool and taking it to such an extreme that it's causing real impairments in your life. But there's nothing wrong with engaging in a ritual when you're under stress. To the contrary, science says that it can actually benefit you in really useful ways. And so, I think of these, we've got this toolbox out there that we can fill with different tools for helping us manage this inner voice. We talked about just a few of them, like, that coaching yourself like a friend, traveling in time in your head, chatter buddies. Rituals are another tool. And they're one that I rely on quite a bit.
Man, that's awesome. I tell you what, this is a fascinating discussion. We could do this for hours, but we're going to honor both your time and your work by saying, go get his book. Yeah. Darren and I just ordered it. The book again is Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters and How to Harness It. You can also find Ethan on ethankross.com. That's KROSS.
And take the quiz. Read through, take the quiz.
The third place you can find him, I was getting lost on this website, and I could see myself spending hours on this multiple days a week, is the University of Michigan Emotion and Self-Control Lab. And it's just an accumulation that you and your colleagues have come up with research studies and resources for all things we discuss in this episode and much more. So we've got one final question. We ask every guest this, and I'm curious. I'm very curious what he's going to say on this one. If you could go back to any point in your life and tell yourself one thing, and in this context, either verbally or in your head, if you could tell yourself one thing, doesn't necessarily mean you go change anything, but if you could just go tell yourself one thing, where do you go and what do you tell yourself?
That's heavy. Where do I go? What do I tell myself? I go back to the time shortly after the birth of my first child, and I tell myself to chill out. It's going to be just fine.
Yes, sir.
I had every caveman protective instinct kick in when my first child was born, and it took me a couple of months to ease off that.
Yeah, that Brooklyn came out in you.
The accent came back. Yeah. It was crazy.
You wise guys, you're calling the doctors wise guys.
What's going on?
Yeah, parents out there, we can all relate to that for sure. Ethan, thank you so much, man. This was a blast. We look forward to connecting again. We look forward to digging into the book as well. Thank you so much.
Ethan, we appreciate you, man. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, guys. Super fun. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Take care.